Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. Since the 1980s, our next guest has been an indelible screen presence, whether he's starring as a PTSD-struck Vietnam vet, a folk singer turned political candidate, a pathological lying cop, a cynical studio exec haunted by a murder, a prisoner looking for escape, or his Oscar-winning turn in Clint Eastwood's Mystic River. Tim Robbins is without a doubt a screen icon. Now he's taken himself back into Stephen King territory with the second season of Hulu's Castle Rock. Let's take a look. Please welcome the great Tim Robbins. Hey.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
What is it like to return to Stephen King world?
Oh, well, it's an entirely different universe,
Yeah.
This Castle Rock compared to Shawshank Redemption. It's just a testament to Stephen King and his incredible ability to write so effectively in so many different genres, to scare the hell out of you and to make you feel something you might not have felt before in your heart.
When you did Shawshank, I don't want to get too into Shawshank because I feel like you probably get harassed about Shawshank everywhere you go.
It's not harassment, it's nice.
It was Frank Darabont who was that his first feature that he had directed, or maybe his second?
His first feature that he directed.
But prior to that, he had written horror movies primarily, right? And it was Stephen King's sort of first foray into a non-horror story.
And Frank wrote the most beautiful script I'd ever read. And, of course I wanted to do it right away.
But what was that like, basically working with people who were primarily known for horror work, but doing this movie that was not a horror movie in any way?
I didn't think about that because I hadn't seen any of Frank's horror work. But
you should. Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors is a very good entry.
Yeah, it's on my Halloween list. But everyone that read that script wanted to realize that beautiful story. And all the actors, Morgan, Clancy Brown, and the incredible cinematographer, Roger Deakins, all were on board for that.
Now, you're in Castle Rock here. Talk about the character that you play. He's kind of trying to keep everything together in the face of complete calamity.
He knows more than most people in the town of the potential of the town to turn dark quickly. And so he not only has this knowledge, but he also has ghosts in his past, as most of the characters in the show do. They're hiding something. There's secrets that will emerge in the course of the season. Everyone holding on to some kind of demons, and they get unleashed.
You've been in so many movies with so many different directors. You've been in movies that you've directed yourself. When you show up to a show or a set, what do you expect to be able to do as an actor there, or do you sort of wait to take a cue from how it's going to be run from the director or showrunner?
Well, as an actor, I want to be an actor. I don't want to be a director.
Right.
It's too much. As a director, I did not appreciate when actors tried to direct. It's best for any show to have one vision, and whether that vision is your vision or not is irrelevant. Everyone can have a great idea about something, but you have to give it over to the leader of the piece to do that. As an actor, I have a responsibility to the truth of the character. So if there's something in the decisions being made that don't mesh with the truth that I believe, then that's when I'll be involved in a discussion.
And what interested you in taking this role in Castle Rock?
I'd never really played this character before, a kind of scion of a town, a bit of a gangster, loan shark, questionable morality, not sure whether he's good or bad. I like characters like that.
Well, from my perspective and what I've seen, he's not necessarily a bad guy. He's sort of he has his own moral code, and he's trying to do the good thing with the cards that have been dealt to him.
Yes, and he's also trying to deal with the mistakes that he's made in his past and the fact that he's dying, and he has to come to some kind of resolution about his life.
You've had a couple forays into supernatural work. I would think Jacob's Ladder, Castle Rock. Are you a genre movie person? Do you watch genre movies at all?
I watch movies if they're good.
Good answer.
Which is harder and harder these days. And we were talking a little bit before about some of the movies that have been coming out recently, and Midsummer was a really
Oh, you like
scary-
Midsummer?
I did. It's you know, it's a different kind of approach, and I like that always when someone tries a new approach. Yeah.
I'm curious, you know, I was going back and I watched the opening scene from The Player. I love The Player so much. I love Robert Altman. I think when I saw Shortcuts when I was in high school, it blew my mind. I didn't know you could do that with movies. But
I had a similar experience in high school.
with Nashville?
Yeah. And that movie turned my head around about what movies could be.
Yeah.
And then to get to meet him and to him to offer me a movie was just stunning in my mind. He was a hero of mine.
A few. You did a few movies with him,
Yeah,
right?
I did 3 movies with him.
What was the third, excuse me?
Pret-a-Porter or Ready
yeah.
to Wear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I was offered this big paycheck to do a movie, and I was broke at the time. And it would conflict with The Player if The Player got financing. It was one of those situations where I had to make one of those difficult decisions, and I turned down the movie that was big money just for the opportunity, the chance to work with Altman. And it wound up happening, The Player, which was great. But I found out later that Bob Altman was, in that interim, offered the money to do it with another actor. And he said no. He said, I
wow.
talked to this kid, Robbins, and I like him, and we're going to do it with him, and I don't care about your financing. I'm doing it with him. I gave him my word.
And didn't he say to you, wasn't, this may be incorrect, but isn't there a story that like when the movie first started, he said to you something along the lines of like, look, the finance people are going to try to get in your head and they're going to try to get in my head and they're going to try to pit us against each other. Let's stick with each other.
He said, let's make a pact. Anyone messes with you, I'll walk off the set. Anyone messes with me, you walk off the set. I said, deal.
Did it ever come to anything like that?
Got close a couple times, but we were pretty, you know, in sync.
Can I ask, it doesn't have to be the specific story of that set, but what comes close? Like what happens that drives the set to that point where someone may have to do that?
You know, this producer disagreeing with the way something has been rewritten, the choices you're making. You know, there was that ending of that movie. You know, I was...
Traffic was a bitch.
Yeah. We didn't have that till very late in pre-production, and we were sitting around, Bob and I, and he was like, I don't know what the ending of this movie is. I said, well, how did MASH end? I forget. And he says, well, it ends, and you know, then you hear the announcement. Radar comes on and says, this is a movie directed by Robert Altman and showed, you know, Donald Sutherland, Elliot Gould. And just sat for a little bit, and then I thought, well, what if the whole movie is pitched to Griffin at the end? So the movie you just seen is pitched to you. He stands up, he claps his hands, he opens his door, he says, we got the ending. Closes the door, he said, I'm never giving you credit for that. I was like, okay, Bob.
You know, one of the things about watching that movie, what's ironic is that the opening of the movie where he's getting the pitches for ostensibly terrible movie ideas, right?
Yes.
It's The Graduate 2, but written by Buck Henry. It's a few sci-fi ideas, and also maybe by people who have never seen a movie in their life, it kind of sounds like at times. All of those, I can have nostalgia for those actually existing than the current crop of movies that we see right now. Because at the very least, those are original movies. Or Graduate 2 is going to be written by Buck Henry, going to be a story about humans. It's not going to be about superheroes.
Right, yeah.
Do you see an irony there at all?
There's a terrible irony. You know, when we won in Cannes for The Player, Bob said to me, I don't think we were mean enough to Hollywood. He knew right.
They awarded us.
He says we should have gone after them harder. But what a great experience to work with him and to learn from him. I directed my first movie right after that. I asked for if I could use his cinematographer and his first AD, and we went off and made Bob Roberts in Pittsburgh right after that. Yeah.
Do you think that you would have made Bob Roberts if you hadn't have worked with him like that? Did you feel so close to that director and that relationship and what was happening
I think
there?
it helped immensely. It was like my film school.
Yeah.
I had never studied film. I had studied film when I was working as an actor, studied how it worked, but I'd mostly been trained to direct in theater. So this was the most perfect opportunity for me to attend a living, breathing film school.
In your first film, Bob Roberts was a mockumentary, and now, kind of coming full circle in a weird way, you have a documentary, which I think is your first documentary, right?
Yes, the
That
first I've directed.
The
Yeah.
first you've directed, yeah, called 45 Seconds of Laughter, which I got the chance to see today. It's beautiful, incredible work.
Thank you.
Work that you've been doing with the Actors Gang. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Well, yeah, about 13 years ago, one of my actresses, Sabra Williams, came to me and said she'd like to start a program in prison, a rehabilitative program, using the work and the way that we work in the Actors Gang, the training that we give our actors, and see if it would apply to rehabilitation. And after the course of a couple of years, we figured out that it could work very well. There's something about the combination of the demand for emotional honesty and the physical nature of the work that we do at the Actors Gang that seemed to resonate with the incarcerated men that we were working with at the time. And we soon found that it could have a transformative effect on their lives. Understand that in prison, there's one acceptable emotion. It's anger. And most people, in order to survive, put on an angry mask on the yard in order to survive. And all of the other emotions are denied or suppressed. And when you allow a room where they can express these emotions and allow them the buffer of a character to play, so it's not really their emotions, it's the character of Harlequino or Capitano or Pantalone, characters from the Commedia dell'arte, then you see stuff start to happen. You see the floodgates open. You see people understand that they are capable of these emotions still, sadness and fear and happiness, to the point where you get them to share with each other and starts to break down barriers that have been there since they've been in prison. Racial barriers, gang barriers. Every time we start a class, we ask that it be racially mixed and that it go across gang lines. And we try to get the people that are struggling, not the well-behaved, not the trustees, but people that are struggling with their incarceration. And we try to get them in the same room with former enemies to see what the collective can do. Achieving tasks together is the first thing we do with the classes. They cannot have success unless they work together. And then when they get into putting their new masks on, the makeup of these characters, and they start expressing these emotions, they start having major revelations, not only about the fact that they've been suppressing emotions for years, but also when you get them in an improv and they realize that they don't have to choose anger as an emotion in response to anger in an improvisation. If they can do it in an improvisation, they can do it in real life. And they start applying these methods out in the yard, and it starts to break down tensions in the prison itself.
You see it very quickly, even before they put the masks on, to the point where it's not even that they're playing with different emotions, it's just that they're allowing themselves to be silly and vulnerable in front of each other. You know, there's something about there is something transcendent about being able to be a fool in front of somebody else.
It helps, you know, to break down barriers. It also is extraordinary what happens with just the whole concept of expressing emotion in front of another person. That's something they're not used to doing, and to have a place where they can do that. You know, the major thing that they have to one of the major things they have to deal with in their incarceration is this pressure to judge people based on the color of their skin or their gang affiliation. It's a natural inclination not to do that, but because of the social situation in prison, they have to in order to survive. And so it's a big burden for a lot of these guys to have to hate when they don't want to hate. And some of our guys tell us that, you know, it starts to break down the divisions on the yard. And occasionally there'll be some altercation where something will go down and they approach the altercation in a completely different way. In fact, seek each other out so that they don't hurt each other.
Well, there's a story that's told within the documentary about one of the inmates who is strip searched or is searched after meeting with a family member where it looked like he was slipped something, and the rule, unspoken rule amongst prisoners, is that they're supposed to run away when they're searched or start a fight
Or
with
attack the guard, yeah.
Or attack the guard, and he doesn't do that because he has the Actors Gang later that day, and he doesn't want to miss it and get in trouble, basically.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, we get this all over. We're in 13 prisons now in the state of California. And we figured out one of our classes at Norco many years ago, we had done 3 sessions with them And we said to them, we're going to be back in 8 months. We're going to a different part of the prison for a while. And 3 months later, we get a call from the prison, and one of the people that we had been teaching had started his own theater company and trained 40 new people and had written and directed a musical that he wanted us to come see. And so we travel out to Norco and we see this beautiful, realization of how we can continue this program and expand the program. The guy had taken it on himself, and so what we started to do after that was train groups and then train people within those groups to run the groups, and so they can run on their own now. And we check in every 6 weeks to make sure they're traveling along the right road.
What made you put together the documentary the way that you put it together? Because there is one version of it where it is informative mostly, and it is telling people about the Actors Gang and telling people about the initiative and talking heads essentially, but you chose a route that was far more, it's an overused term at this point, but cinema verite, where we are actually watching these things take place versus being told what's taking place.
Yeah, I don't like to see that when I'm watching films. I don't want to be told what to feel. I want to feel. And you'd mentioned Frederick Wiseman before. I've always admired him as a documentarian. And, we did have a lot of talking heads in our first cut of the movie. And when I was working with a new editor, I asked him, Neil Stelzner, I asked him, please just take out all the talking heads. I don't want to see any of them. You can use their voices, but can we see something visual that is interesting for us? And so, it is about emotion. It is, this work is about emotion and the liberating possibilities of expressing emotion for all of us, really. We find the same thing in the schools that we work in. We're in 12 schools in the Los Angeles area, and we see kids coming out of their shells constantly. Kids in, continuation high schools, which are the high schools for kids that have gotten into trouble. We see traumatized kids. We see kids that cannot make eye contact, that are completely shut off. And we get them in a room, and one thing we realized early on, like in prison where anger is the predominant emotion, in schools for children, happiness is the emotion that is demanded of them constantly by authority figures in their life, whether it's teachers or parents or relatives. They want their kids to be happy. Just be happy. Don't be scared. Don't be angry. Don't be afraid. And the kid is told from an early age, don't express emotions because it makes me uncomfortable as an adult. And it winds up shutting them off. And so we have a room where they can play characters, they can get crazy, they can be angry as hell, they can be terrified, they can be sad as they want, playing these characters. And these kids start to get liberated themselves and start to be able to make eye contact and be able to be sentient beings and conscious and aware and present. And that's a huge thing, particularly if you're trying to, succeed in a classroom, to be able to stand in front of people with confidence and know that your voice matters, that your story is important. And this is what we try to bring out in the children. And we were finding, incredible results. Arts are the liberator. I've lobbied in Sacramento many, many times on this. And, the fact that arts funding is cut from schools first is crazy. I would not have made it through high school without an arts program. I would have dropped out because I could not do the math and science. And to think that this is some kind of disposable part of their education is really foolish and really detrimental to these children's lives. And so to give them a space where they can really express themselves, it helps everything. It helps everything. I've seen schools turn around completely. I was part of a turnaround arts school up in Hayward, California, that went from 15th in their district academically with 2 years of arts programming, went to #1 academically. This is a key thing. And as I told them in Sacramento, if I came to you, if I was a pharmaceutical company and I came to you with a drug that could reduce recidivism by 50% and could reduce in-prison violence by 89%, you would fast track that drug. And I've got that drug for you. It's the arts. And we've been ignoring it. We've been cutting it from our funding, and we've got to reinstate it. and we were able to get it reinstated in the California budget.
I like that you were clapping. Give him a round of applause. It is one of the great symptoms of American capitalism, which is that if it's not an obvious economic contributor, we don't value it.
Yet, in any private school, you will find vigorous arts programming.
Right. Only for the rich kids. The Actors Gang, you know, you're not also just working in schools and in prisons. You also have a couple shows coming up, right? That you're doing. You're directing 1984 as well as another show.
Yes, we have 1984 open right now at our theater in Culver City, California. I just stepped in. I'm acting for the first time on stage since 2004, when I played the Public Theater with Embedded. So that's been exciting and terrifying to get back up on stage. That's running through December 7th. You can get tickets at theactorsgang.com. And then in the end of January, we go out on the road with a show that I developed with my company called The New Colossus. It's about immigration and what it is to be a refugee. And I asked 12 of my actors who all had roots in places other than here, that I asked them to do the research and to write the story of their ancestors and how they got from oppression to freedom. And so the play is performed in 12 different languages. It is 12 different periods of time from 1865 through the present. The 1865 story tells the story of the northern migration from freed slaves that needed to get away from a growing KKK and a violent future. So they migrated north to people that came from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Vietnam, from Iran, all these places that underwent tumult, revolution, and needed to get out of there for their own safety. And one of the things we find at the end of each show, we ask our audiences how many, first of all, are native, indigenous, and some hands go up. And how many people are descended from people that came here against their will, and some hands go up. And I ask where, and the tragedy is most African Americans don't know where the roots are in Africa, because that was erased tragically. And then I ask if there's any immigrants or refugees, and some hands come up, and I ask where and when, what year did you immigrate. Then I ask any sons or daughters of immigrants or refugees, more hands come up. Grandsons, granddaughters of immigrants or refugees, more hands come up. Great-grandsons, more hands come up. Before you know it, the whole audience has put up their hands. Something that tells the story of America right there. In our little theater in Los Angeles, we have a map that we ask people to put magnetic pins in when they enter the theater, and every night we would have the entire world represented in this small theater. And that's what America is. And then you see the stories that come out after the play, this testament of people that tell their stories of their family's migration. One person in particular stands out for me. This one woman, she says, my great-grandmother came to New York City when she was 8 years old, alone, with a photograph of her relative. No address, and that's all she had. And she found her. Wow. She found her. And that was her great-great-grandmother. And then this other woman came up to me and says, I want to tell you the story of a soldier. He was part of a battalion that was liberating Buchenwald, the concentration camp. And she said, this soldier saw this woman, one of the people that had been nearly starved to death. And he saw that she was starting to falter, to fall. And the soldier, who was a private, started to run towards her, and the sergeant said, stand down, soldier, that's not your job. And he went anyway. He caught her before she fell, and he carried her to the field hospital and visited her in the course of her recovery. And this woman said to me outside my theater, she said, that was my father and my mother. Wow. And this is the kind of stories that we all share, you know, this incredible, I don't know, this collective strength, this determination, first of all, to say no to the world that they were living in. That's not acceptable to me. I will risk my life to leave this. They made it out. Some didn't survive, but those that got here made it out. And then they made it to whatever journey they had to take beyond that. to the boat that got them over across the ocean to us. And then once they landed with nothing, they survived and they provided for their families. They created families. They created futures out of this determination, this will, this strength, this courage. And that is the immigrant story. That is the story of refugees. We had a matinee in Los Angeles, and usually our map is filled up with the world. This matinee was from a high school in Los Angeles, so it was mostly Mexican and Central American and a little bit of South America. And this story gave us the opportunity to talk to these children about the fear that they're living in right now. The fear that they're living in that their uncle is going to be deported, who's been here for 20 years working honestly, paying taxes. Their aunt, their mother, their father. And we started talking about what it is, what that journey is. Thinking about what your parents did or what your grandparents did in making the decision to leave behind. I'm not going to subject my family to drug violence. I'm going to move north. I'm going to risk my life to get there to create a future for my family. That's the story of a hero. I'm sorry, that is a heroic journey. In any culture, that's a heroic journey. The courage it takes, the strength it takes, the tenacity it takes to make that journey is something that should be inspiring us. And the fact that this rhetoric is out there, such hateful rhetoric to make us distrust and dislike these people that have struggled and survived this journey, I hope that the play, we're going all over the United States with it, I hope we can get this dialogue going. I hope we can make people start to testify about their own lives and their own families. Most of us are 2 generations removed from immigration or refugee status.
I feel like there was a period of time in your career, and maybe in the 90s and the early 2000s, where you were synonymous with the sort of Hollywood left or the political left in some respects. Forgive me if you disagree with that perception.
Okay.
And
I've been called worse.
I'm one. I mean, that was inspirational to me to see an actor whose movies that I liked who was speaking up and saying things that I was thinking at the time when I was that age and wasn't surrounded by family members or anything that were talking about stuff like that. I'm curious if at a certain point it seemed like you pulled back from it a little bit and devoted it more to your art and to the theater rather than making public statements or being a very public activist anymore. I wonder if you didn't see the fruits of that labor.
Well, it's not that. I mean, I came out for Bernie in the last election cycle. Caught hell for that. I mean, it's listen, you got to speak your truth. I don't think I've really stepped back as much as I haven't been given the forum.
Fair enough.
And maybe that's strategic. I don't know. But
what about Tim Robbins on this one? No.
But one of the things that has been feeding my soul has been the actual work, actually going into prison, actually creating these programs for kids. Because then you see the result, When we're fighting against this behemoth, this how do you change things? It can be very frustrating to live your life when your goal is massive change. And I think what we all have to understand is that we can affect change on a local level. And if everyone did that, we'd have massive change on a national level. And so I just, driving away from those prisons, driving away from those schools after one of our sessions really fills me with such inspiration and hope for the future because I've seen the result. I see how it can change. And when you're working mostly in concept and abstract, it's very difficult to get satisfaction out of that. I believe it's important to do fundraising, and I believe it's important to support a lot of these organizations that need the support. But I would also recommend finding a way to do something anonymously for the good of somebody that is not serving you, and you don't have a publicist along with you to document it, because that's what really feeds the soul. That's something that can really change your life in a positive way. And
also, fighting just for the abstract or the sort of that behemoth often can just end up resorting to the sort of cultural war, the team sport of it, rather than the actual activism and the
Yeah, and
purpose.
I think that a lot of people feel that activism is spending time with your devices and saying hateful things to other people. And I'm sorry, but that is not helping. We have to find ways to bridge the gap. We've got to find ways to communicate like we used to, eye to eye, and agree to have different opinions, but still respect each other in some way. And I think that the abstract of this is very dangerous to society because it allows us to say really mean and hateful things to each other, and things we would not be able to say if we were looking at these people eye to eye. We have to start realizing that these abstracts are actual human beings, and that they have their own opinions. And yes, yes, you can stand up for your cause and you can have an intellectual argument in these forums, but when it starts getting into attacking, it's something I have to leave behind. I have to I don't understand, for example, I don't understand the strategy of attacking people that are supporting a candidate. For example, Bernie Sanders has been getting attacked from the middle for months now, and I don't get the strategy. I just don't understand how that's going to serve anybody. Why would you attack one of your strongest candidates who's got a base support of 1 million volunteers and can work to help change things in this country? Why do you go after that person? I don't get it.
Can I pose a question on that?
Sure.
Do you think it's potentially because they're more scared of him than they are of a GOP policies?
Well, there you go. That might be the answer.
They're more scared of a worker-led revolution than the sort of status quo and the consistency.
Which is the reason I think we're in the mess we're in, is because we have not been aiming high enough to change things. Bernie's right. We should have universal health care. That every Western society has it. We can find a way to do it. It's just there hasn't been the will to do that because too many people are taking donations from pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. And so when you look at is it possible to change things, and you look at the candidates involved, and one of them is inspiring millions of young people, why would you attack that person? I don't get the strategy. I see that what you're saying, that they're perhaps doing it because they're afraid of the change that might happen. But then
because they accept the checks from the same people that the GOP
exactly. But why not just be honest about that then? Right. Why is it always from the other side? Why is it in just ignoring him on the major cable channels?
Because at the end of the day, Bernie wins on all the issues. I hate to say it, but like even Mitt Romney said recently that the only person he doesn't like in the Senate is Bernie Sanders because he scowls so much. And it's like, buddy, that's not why you don't like Bernie Sanders. Why don't you just say why you don't like him? Because you can't. Because even Republicans, even independents who lean right, support a lot of what Bernie Sanders says because he's actually advocating for the largest group of people in this country.
Yeah. Well, that's why I support him. It's not for personal interest because I'm going to get taxed more, and I'm okay with that. Yeah.
I'm going to make a huge shift right now because I'm curious personally. Your Oscar-winning performance in Mystic River is beautiful and incredible. But I am curious what it's like delivering a performance like that for a director like Clint Eastwood, who is notoriously one-take Clint and gives no notes. Yet you are giving a performance that I would imagine in some respects is extremely vulnerable, and you may want a director who can kind of tell you what you're doing is exactly right or is too much or too little.
So we all knew this going in, that we had better have our stuff together before we go on the set because he only gives you one take. And pretty much everything you see in Mystic River is either the first or the second take. He very rarely do a second take. So we would get together, and here's the good news about this, by the way, is you start at 9 in the morning and you're done by 2 every day. And, movie sets are 9 to 11 at night, And so we would get off
that cast was having a good time after shoots.
But you know what? We had a good time, but we also had the discipline every night to meet together and go through the scenes that we were doing the next day, go through our accents, figure out, and to make sure that we knew the lines. And the other thing that was beautiful about this experience is when you walked on the set, it was like the most silent place you've ever been. The ADs are not yelling. They're not. It's all like, okay, they're walking right now. Okay, we're rolling. Okay, cut. You know, it's like that quiet, that serene, that zen, and that creates such a concentration and a respect for the work. It's truly effective.
Did you get the sense that if you and the actors hadn't decided amongst yourselves to meet after a day of work and go over your accents and your scenes, that it wouldn't, like, he still would have just been doing one take on set? Like, it didn't matter how prepared you were in some respects? Like,
Yes.
That's the decision that you've made. That's what I'm going
Yes,
with.
and I believe early on, I think one of us went up to Clint and said, is it okay that we meet after to go over the next day's scenes? And he said, yeah, that would be a good idea.
Which is like almost like I don't care, essentially. We have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who's the question? Right here.
Yeah. How you doing?
Hi.
All right. Well, the host had touched on it a little bit about Shawshank Redemption. I'm a big fan. I'm sorry. I wanted to know, how did you mentally prepare yourself to play that role of being Dupree, knowing that you was falsely accused, and how was it working with Morgan Freeman?
It was great working with Morgan Freeman. I loved him as an actor before I met him, and I loved him as a human being. To be able to hang out with him and spend time with him. The way I prepared, well, first of all, I think I entered the project without any judgment on the people that are incarcerated. I grew up not far from here, about 4 blocks that way. And when I was growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, it was a little violent. And there were, you know, like when I would be walking home from school, there's one path I would take. I knew I couldn't go down that path because there's a kid that beat you up down that way. And, you know, that kind of learning at age 8 or 9, you either run fast or fight. And so I grew up in that environment. So a lot of the people that I grew up with, some of them fell into the system. And so I didn't feel that far removed from people that were incarcerated. And then when you look at what happened in the 80s with the drug war, the making drugs that were not illegal in the early 60s became illegal, and then you started to see who was being incarcerated. And it wasn't me. It was there, but for the grace of God go I. And you started to see the injustice of that system. Then you can't feel that far removed from people that are incarcerated. If you're aware of this and admit who you are. Like you know, in the 80s, we were seeing people getting busted for crack cocaine and getting sent for 20 years, while someone on Wall Street with a pound of cocaine is getting off with, you know, couple days service. So we already knew the injustice was there when we started that movie. And then when I was there, I prepared by talking to people, people that were incarcerated. I went and spent some time in solitary confinement because I wanted to see what that felt like, what happens to you when you are locked up and can't get out. And you know, of course, I knew I'd get out, but just the feeling of it and the window and the importance of the window. But then also talking to the prison guards and asking them what would they do if they were in charge, what would they change? And this is 1993 in a conservative area of Ohio, and these prison guards were saying, legalize drugs. And I said, well, why? He says, because we get these kids coming in for possession, they're spending 2-3 years in prison, and there's no GED programs or job training programs. So basically what we're doing is we're putting these kids in what they called crime school, because they're putting them in with violent felons, and in order to survive, they have to become something they weren't before they came in. So they didn't see the sense of it. And they said, if you don't have the courage to legalize drugs, at least have 2 different places, 2 different institutions for nonviolent and violent criminals. They just didn't, you know, they understood it. Nobody was listening to them in 1993 because we were on this whole, you know, tough on crime thing. And that's both Democrats and Republicans that were doing that. And it wound up with, I think, something that is something that we should be ashamed of, the fact that we incarcerate more people in this country than anywhere else in the world.
Was that was Shawshank the beginning of your interest in working in prisons? Because you then made Dead Man Walking, which obviously isn't just about prisons; it's about the death penalty. But was that the spark for you that lit the fuse in terms of your interest?
That
in
was the
working with
first one I
prisoners?
did inside, yeah, and then I learned more doing Dead Man Walking and my sitting at the feet of Sister Helen Prejean, you know, learning from her, learning about that whole system. And spending some time in Angola prison down in Louisiana, which is, you know, wow, that's a tough place.
I think we have time for one more question. Right here.
Hello, Mr. Robbins. You have an incredible career, one of the greatest, and you work with a lot of outstanding directors and actors. You have an Academy Award, Golden Globe. Is there anything else you want to achieve? Is there anybody you extremely want to work with? Thank you.
Yeah, there's so much more I want to do. I've been writing a couple scripts that I want to direct. If you happen to have like, $10, $15 million, I'd love to talk to you after.
Is there a comic book character involved? Because maybe we could work something out.
No, unfortunately
Sorry,
not.
you got nothing for you, Tim.
No, sorry. Okay. Well, I'll go back to the drawing board then. There's things I want to do in cinema. There's things I want to do in theater. I want to, you know, do some more music, playing out on the road. It's an open road. You know, there's so many possibilities. There's certain directors I'd love to work with. I was saying how much I admired Cold War, this beautiful film from last year, and the Square. There's some really talented filmmakers out there that I'd love to work with. But I have a very busy life because I run this nonprofit, the Actors Gang in Los Angeles, so I'm never bored. But so that when opportunities come in, when scripts come in, at this stage, they have to be really, really compelling to me for me to leave Los Angeles.
Has it been like that for a while for you, that since the Actors Gang has really taken off and you're running it, that it's kind of hard to get you away from it?
Not with a good script. You know, the organization runs on its own. It's got a whole staff, and I can make phone calls and make things happen. But it's more that, you know, at certain stage of your life, it's like, you know, do you want to spend the time on something you're not passionate about? And I'd much rather do a workshop production with my company that can get to some kind of truth that I'm after than do something just for the obligatory reason of being on a set. It's the reason I haven't directed movie scripts that have been submitted to me, because in order to make that leap, I have to really, really love it, because it's something you're going to spend 3 years with, and it's something you better believe in, and it has to be a story you need to tell. And so, I'm okay with the formula of, you know, we just toured the new Colossus in South America, and we performed in Buenos Aires in this outdoor theater to, you know, 3,000 people, and it was the most beautiful evening and beautiful experience, and I lived with that in my heart, you know, and that's 3,000 people, but it could, you know, I'd rather reach 3,000 people with the truth than make a movie that I don't believe in that reaches a lot more people, but there's a lie in it. You understand? I don't want... That's not necessary at this point in my career.
I'm curious, and I know I've had you here for a while, and this is going to feel like I'm backtracking for a long story, but I don't mean to. You know, you said that Altman was your film school, and you didn't really know much about film prior to working with him. When you started acting, were you doing it as a source for seeking the truth, or did you fall into it in some way, and then while doing it, you started noticing and started feeling like the power of it and what the truth was?
Well, let's be honest. I started acting so that girls would be interested in me. I mean, I'll be honest. That was the main reason.
Top Gun over here.
But then when I started to make money because I was, I produced the first Actors Gang professional production, a midnight version of this great play called Ubu the King, and we took it out and it ran for 6 months, but I produced it on my tips from delivering pizzas in Beverly Hills. And so then in the course of that run, I got my first professional job. And the paycheck was a little bit larger than, than delivering pizzas in Beverly Hills. So I soon realized if I can continue this work, I can produce more theater. So that's what I did for the first 5 years of my career. I would do TV episodics, small parts in movies, and I thought, wow, what a great thing. I drove my agents crazy because I would say, listen, I got to take 4 months off to do the new Actors Gang show every year, so you can't send me on any auditions for 4 months. And they drove them crazy. It was like doing equity waiver theater in 99-seat houses. Like, what are you, crazy?
This is like while you're building heat as a young actor in Hollywood, too.
Yes, and they're like, we got heat on you. You got to, no, you got to understand. And what it did is allowed me to develop as a writer and a director. And as an actor, when you're in front of a live audience, they don't lie to you. If they don't like it, you get that feeling, and so you got to get your stuff together in order to perform in front of people, and that discipline and the discipline of like-minded individuals that were in the Actors Gang gave me the lifeblood to continue. And every time I started to do movies, I would always come back and give back. And direct a new play, or fund a theater, or fund. I produced over 100 plays at the Actors Gang because it was the laboratory. It was the place where I felt most alive creatively. And if you have a place like that, when you start jobbing out to different movies, you're bringing that training with you. You're bringing that discipline with you. It was extremely helpful to have the discipline at an early age to say no to all the temptations that Hollywood has to offer, which can be very fast and furious, come at you a lot, lots of money, and sometimes that can kill people, destroy people. And I saw it happen with some of my peers. And I've always been very grateful to the idea that I had this other outlet that could keep me sane in a town that can drive you a little crazy.
What is it like to be one of the few? I know, I'll rap. What is it like to be one of the? We're talking here.
Hey.
What is it like to be one of the few people who truly cares about theater in Los Angeles?
No, there's a lot of people. There's a lot of people. A great theater scene out in Los Angeles.
Stereotype about Los Angeles.
It is,
it's not
and
necessarily
we
true.
have more theater going on there, and there's more people have the possibility of doing theater in Los Angeles because it's more affordable than it is here in New York, and we have a lot of great theater companies out there. We don't get enough credit for that, and so a shout out to all those LA artists that are working hard.
Absolutely. Tim, it's been amazing to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Castle Rock premieres tomorrow night on Hulu. I think it's like 3 episodes that they're showing on premiere night. And for 1984 tickets, people can go to the Actors Gang website, right, as well, and look up
theactorsgang.com.
theactorsgang.com, as well as tour dates for the upcoming shows.
For the new Colossus.
For the new Colossus.
We're going to Charlotte, Detroit, Chicago, Boston, Nashville, Durango, Folsom, California, and Iowa City, right around the primary.
Tim Robbins, everybody. Let's hear it.